The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
And hello, I'm Jeff Rivenbark with WTVI, PBS Charlotte. Welcome to the U.S. Congressional House District 12 primary debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. During the next 50 minutes, you'll hear from 5 of the 7 Democratic candidates in the U.S. Congressional House District 12 race. Rodney Moore tells us he has suspended his campaign, although his name remains on the ballot. Rick Miller could not be reached. We do want to show you the newly drawn 12th District map is now entirely within Mecklenburg County, with the exception of the southeastern portion of the county, which is now part of District 9. Questions for today's debate were provided by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. I'll call on the candidates in random order, and you will have 30 seconds to respond, but a few questions do require simply a yes-no response. If you would like to challenge your opponent, you may use your challenge card. You'll have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate has 3 challenges during this debate. You will be allowed to make a 30-second closing statement at the end of the debate. So now let's meet the Democratic candidates for U.S. Congressional House District 12. Our first candidate is Alma Adams, who is the incumbent, Tricia Cotham, Carla Cunningham, Malcolm Graham, and Gardenia Henley. And again, very glad to have you all here with us today. Our first question is, how do you view the state legislature's redrawing of U.S. House Districts 12 and 9? Do you agree or disagree? And again, we are looking for a 30-second response, and we will begin with Alma Adams.
Well, I think the fact that the legislature misdrew the lines from the beginning, gerrymandered those districts, I'm certainly opposed to that. I think we needed to go back and redraw them. We still have not made a final determination, but I agree that they needed to be redrawn.
Tricia Cotham?
Well, all the Democrats voted no for this redistricting. And, you know, the one thing that I think is really, if we can have a positive here, is that for the first time, Mecklenburg County can speak with one voice. That predominantly the 12th district has changed dramatically, and now we can speak with one unified voice from Mecklenburg County, and that is one positive.
Carla Cunningham.
I did not agree with the new lines that were drawn in the legislature. For one thing, they removed the cause of race. So race was totally removed and considered when the new lines were drawn. So I have not agreed with the lines, but initially it did need to be redrawn because of the shape was so irregular, and it was one of the most irregular district shapes in the whole country.
Malcolm Graham.
The 12th Congressional District was historically the most litigated district in the country. It's a new district now, all within Mecklenburg County. So it gives the voters of Charlotte and Davidson and Cornelius, Huntersville, and Pineville the opportunity to vote for a candidate who lives in Mecklenburg County to represent Mecklenburg County. And I think that's an exciting thing for the voters of Charlotte and those surrounding towns.
Gardenia Henley.
Yes, I totally agree with the redrawing of the map, and I also would like to applaud the NAACP and the others who put forth the initial lawsuit in order for this to happen. And I also applaud the judges who had the courage to actually redraw the maps. It works for Charlotte. If it works for Charlotte, then it works for me. I'm very happy that it happened, and I'm happy to have been a part of the map before it was redrawn as well.
Thank you. Our second question, Congresswoman Adams and Ms. Henley will begin first with your response, and then we will ask the other panelists, the other candidates, their response. How do you respond to a concern that District 12 needs to be represented by longtime residents of Mecklenburg County? We begin with you, Ms. Adams, first.
Thank you for your question. I've had the pleasure of representing Mecklenburg County with the majority of the citizens voting for me. I've been representing them. We've been able to deliver for Charlotte, bringing back the resources that Charlotte and Mecklenburg needed, funding for the Blue Line, the Gold Line, funding as well for our schools, funding for the Bethlehem Center. So I believe that we've done a good job of reaching out and speaking and fighting for Mecklenburg and Charlotte.
Thank you. Gardenia Henley, your response.
Yes, I'm very happy that to be here, and I'm also happy that these initial items or whatever are coming up to be put for us. I am the only candidate who has national and international experience, and I want to say to the taxpayers today that it's not very important that a person be from Mecklenburg County, but really what is important is that you have legislative experience and you have the knowledge to be able to do the things that need to be done in Charlotte.
I have to cut you off there, but thank you. Okay, let's ask the same question to the other candidates. Tricia Cotham, let's begin with you.
Thank you. I think it's extremely important that we have someone from Mecklenburg County. This is a purely Mecklenburg County seat, and the voters of Mecklenburg deserve to have someone who understands the problems of Mecklenburg County, who has lived here, who has worked here, who has been able to vote here, and it's extremely important that we have Mecklenburg County.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham, your response?
I think it is very important that the person that represents the district live inside of the district. I've been a resident in Mecklenburg County for over 40 years, and I think if you live here, you know what your community issues are, and you can reach out to your congressional person and express what those issues are in your community. For myself, I've been a community activist, so therefore I am very connected to the community. And right now, my district sits inside of the epicenter, which is in the center of the newly drawn district.
Thank you. Malcolm Graham, your response.
I think it's extremely important to have someone from Mecklenburg County representing Mecklenburg County. I've been in this community since 1981, served as a nonprofit executive director, a city council member, a state senator. The projects that Mrs. Adam talked about in reference to the Blue Line was my project working to bring transit to North Tryon Street to University City. The Gold Line is a project I work with Johnson C. Smith University to bring streetcar funding from Charlotte. We need someone from Mecklenburg County who knows our history, who knows where we are today, and has a vision for the future as we move forward. It's very important to have representative from Charlotte.
Thank you. We do have a challenge from Congresswoman Adams.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that it is correct that the local elected officials, your mayor, members of your county commission and others requested the additional funding for the Blue Line, the Gold Line, that I was able to get for them. So I just want to clarify that for the citizens' understanding.
Okay, we have two other challenges. Let's begin first with Ms. Gardenia Henley.
Yes, thank you very much. When we talk about running for Congress and a legislative position such as this, we're not talking about a local position of council member or mayor or a position such as that at the local level where representatives really should live within their communities or whatever. But what we're talking about is a position that is at the federal level where people really need to have that federal experience that I have. So when candidates talk about you have to live in the immediate community, it's just not true, and it doesn't make any sense. If it made sense, then we would not be able to run for office in the districts where we do not currently live.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm Graham, you have a challenge?
Again, as a council member in the state Senate, Senator, I fought for, advocated for, and made sure funding was available, the local match, the state match, and working with our past congressmen to make sure funding was there for the North Tryon transit line. Worked for 7 years at Johnson C. Smith University, not only to help advocate and request the funding from the federal government for the streetcar, but also did $25 million of other infrastructure investment on the corridor. It's really important to have someone who has a historical perspective of the issues here locally to identify federal priorities at the federal level.
All right, thank you. Our next question is, how do you propose that the stalemate between the Justice Department, the McCrory administration, and the state legislature over House Bill 2 be resolved? And do you agree or disagree with House Bill 2? We will begin with Tricia Cotham.
Thank you. I completely disagree with House Bill 2, and in fact, I was the first Democrat to lead the charge against this absolutely discriminatory legislation, and that has so many other things that are not related to the first part of this bill. This is wrong. This goes against everything that North Carolina should and must stand for. It's time for our governor to show leadership instead of trying to bully, and even now trying to bully the Department of Justice. And this is a tragedy, it's an embarrassment, and it's a loss of jobs. PayPal losing 400 jobs right here in Charlotte is devastating to working families.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham, your response.
I totally disagree with House Bill 2, and I suppose at this point that the Department of Justice is in their hands, let them handle it. But for me, it hits home because I have a brother that is totally transgender, and he lives in New York. And if he came here, he would be quite uncomfortable probably. But if we look at the House Bill 2 and look at what it could do to education in just Charlotte-Mecklenburg alone, that's $250 million. So I am gravely concerned that we have moved in that direction, and hopefully some type of reconciliation will be made.
Thank you. Malcolm Graham?
I absolutely oppose House Bill 2 and what's happening in Raleigh. It's losing jobs, costing Mecklenburg County and the state of North Carolina millions of dollars. What we need is honest brokers in Raleigh and Washington, D.C. What we need is more statesmanship where people meet in the middle. That's where the country's at. People want individuals to go to Washington, D.C. to represent their interests, which is really in the middle in reference to the left and the right working together to come to a compromise. I'm sorry to say that the federal government has to be the adult in the room to make sure that that compromise comes about.
Thank you. Gardenia Henley, your response.
Yes, thank you. I disagree with House Bill 2, and I just pose a quick question is, where were the legislators when this bill actually was before the floor? It's not okay to get angry and walk out on a bill and put your personal feelings into it. We need someone who's going to continue to fight at the state level and at the federal level as well. How do we deal with the stalemate? The first thing that I also want to say in regards to that is that this probably should not have ever been voted on by the council members. It should have gone on the ballot for the people to decide. This is America. It's government for the people and by the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Alma Adams, your response.
I spoke out immediately against House Bill 2. We've written to the governor several times, spoken to him as well, just as I did when he left our district, District 12, without representation for almost a year. I think that the stakeholders need to come to the table. We've been talking about this in the Congress as well. It is an absolute disgrace. It is the most insensitive thing that I've ever seen the legislature do. And so I hope that we can bring it to resolution because it is costing us really a financial strain in Mecklenburg and Charlotte and throughout our state.
Thank you. Our next question, Republican leader Newt Gingrich and Democratic President Bill Clinton worked together to keep the government going during one of the most successful economic expansions during the 1990s. Yet today we find very little evidence of collaboration between the political parties. How can both parties work together to provide good government for all people? We begin with Carla Cunningham.
The way that I see good government functioning is that we have to sometimes put our ideology and philosophy aside and focus on the total needs of the people. That's what seems to be lost in the environment that we are operating in now, is that we're so far to the left and so far to the right that we can't come to a middle ground. So I see the possibility as we move forward in the next generation of newly elected people that will possibly be one of the things that you see as people move toward the center and stop not so far to the left or right.
Malcolm Graham?
I think it's important that both parties put country over party and do what's in the best interest of the citizens of Mecklenburg County and the United States of America. All my professional career, I have been a bridge builder. I work with Republicans in the state Senate. I work with Republicans on the Charlotte City Council, trying to find common solutions that's in the best interest of the people. And I believe that that's what's missing in Washington, D.C. Certainly I'll go to Washington and fight for you and fight on your behalf. But I also know that sometimes you have to work with people that you disagree with to come to a consensus that's in the best interest of all the people. I'll work for everyone and work together to make that happen.
Thank you. Gardenia Henley?
We need to be able to, as or what they call it, is to be able to get along on the playground, so to speak. All of my career, I have been able to deal with Republicans and Democrats as well. And what really needs to happen is that we need to respect each other more and think more about the taxpayers. And as we are on the Hill or wherever we are and fighting for the taxpayers, we need to let it be known that, we're going to get along, but if you're wrong, you're wrong. And we need to not be afraid to tell people that regardless of their party affiliation, and to be able to fight in that regard, is for the people who we represent.
Thank you. Alma Adams?
Thank you for your question. I've worked a long time across the aisles in the legislature, working to get the state's minimum wage increase. It turned out to be a bipartisan bill. In the Congress, we just passed a transportation bill, FAST Act. It was a bipartisan bill. It's going to do a lot for Charlotte and Mecklenburg County in terms of our infrastructure and our roads and the other things that we need in terms of transit. I also started the first bipartisan HBCU caucus with a Republican co-chair from Alabama, 56 members across the aisle. And then finally, the Student Success Act was passed, and it is a bipartisan effort.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
I think this is an issue where I can distinguish myself greatly from my opponents. I have worked very hard to build relationships in the legislature for the last 10 years, and I've worked under Democratic and Republican control. And over the last few years with the Republicans in charge, I've made myself a very leading voice on education and on small business, but without compromising on principle. And that's absolutely key, and I can take those values to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Our next question is, a September 2014 Harvard study found the growth disparity between the very wealthy and the lower and middle classes is no longer sustainable. What is your solution? We begin with Malcolm Graham.
I think the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we pay everybody an honest day pay for honest day work by increasing the minimum wage. I think we ought to do it at a $15 an hour level. I think we have to really invest in preschool education and reading and literacy, and something that I'm really fond of in terms of making sure that our students are prepared to go to college. I think we got to make college more affordable in terms of making sure that students have the resources to attend college and to participate. And then I think we have to give people an opportunity for business ownership to own their own business so that they can take care of their family and support their communities.
Thank you. Gardenia Henley?
Yes, the 1% are here, and we have to acknowledge that. But one thing that we really need to focus in on is parity. As far as women are concerned, equal pay for equal work. And we have not realized that yet. And we also need to make sure that the 1% are being taxed properly, and that the taxes that are being imposed on everyone is not just across the board, but it should be by group. And basically, that's the main thing that we need to look at is the inequality as far as income is concerned.
Thank you. Alma Adams, your response.
Yeah, as a teacher of 40 years, I've got to tell you that education undergirds everything. And I think we've got to make sure that all of our children are sufficiently educated, that we provide the educational incentives, and not only for them, but for job opportunities, and improve what we're doing in our schools, offering vocational education and those kinds of things, so that they will be prepared to go immediately into work, as well as to go on into college if they choose to do so. I think we also have to invest in our businesses and provide incentives for them to keep them here, and so that they can continue to grow new businesses and create those opportunities for all of our citizens here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
Thank you. Too many working families and too many single mothers are working too hard and are not getting enough back in return. Government has not worked for them. It has been an obstacle. Wages are stagnant. Working class, middle class families are suffering tremendously, by the wealthy have these great taxes just for them, and that should be cut. That is wrong. We need to have income equality for everyone in North Carolina, for everyone in our country, and that's how we make sure that we get ahead and so that everyone can go to a great school, have a good job, and can live out the American dream, because that's what we all deserve.
Carla Cunningham?
This issue is really important to me because I recall when I graduated from licensed practical nurse school down at Central Piedmont Community College, I only was making $4.76 an hour and was raising 2 children alone. So I know what it is like not to have enough to raise your children and keep food on the table. I have supported 2 minimum wage bills, primary response to them, since the first session I've served. I just put in another minimum wage increase bill. But one thing we know for sure is currently in Mecklenburg County, the city is the last in the entire country for upward mobility. And what that means is a child that is born into poverty will less likely as an adult be out of poverty.
All right, thank you. Our next question is, when 70% of the U.S. economy depends on domestic spending, is it time to support a $15 minimum wage indexed to inflation? Again, 30-second response. We begin with Gardenia Henley.
I support the $15 an hour minimum wage, but I also realize, having a financial background, that when we increase minimum wage, there's a lot of people out there who will be negatively affected by that. So again, my experience comes into play because I know enough and I'm smart enough to know that when minimum wage is increased, that we're going to have to do some other things with the businesses or whatever. And one of the things that I have, I'm the only candidate, by the way, that has a plan. It's called the Henley Plan, and it's on my website, thepeoplescandidate.org. But what needs to be done is these businesses need to receive incentives for actually giving people an increase in minimum wage as well.
Thank you. Alma Adams, your response?
I have always been a supporter of increasing the minimum wage. We need a living wage, and it actually exceeds greater than $15. But I think that is a good number. But I think where we've seen the increase occurring in states across America, that you actually have better workers. The workers are more positive about what they do. They give you a better day's work. The employers have a tendency to grow as well. So it's not what we always hear that it's going to decrease jobs and that kind of thing. It's going to increase jobs. It's going to help to spur our economy. I do support it. I think we need to get there, and it's going to be a benefit for workers and for employers.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
Wages are absolutely stagnant and all around the country, and especially right here in North Carolina. Minimum wage, the way it is right now, no family can live, provide for their family, provide housing and child care, and save for the future. And that's a devastating reality in Mecklenburg County and all across our country. We must raise our living wage, and we must do it over time and with a plan. And I think that's really important because the $15 in California is mainly related to their cost of living, where in North Carolina it would be lower, but we must start working for a plan to get there.
Thank you. Once again, the question is, when 70% of the U.S. economy depends on domestic spending, is it time to support a $15 minimum wage indexed to inflation? Carla Cunningham, your response.
I think it is time that we support a minimum wage increase, but we also need to look at small businesses when we make that decision to do so, because that would impact them as well. The first piece of legislation that I put in on minimum wage increase took into consideration small businesses. So I think that we need to move to a livable wage, but we may have to do it in increments, because if we go all the way to 15 at once, we could see small businesses suffer as well.
Thank you. Malcolm Graham?
I do support increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Family needs the security of being able to provide for their families, provide good educational options for them, healthcare options. You only can do that if you're making resources to provide for your family, as well as making a livable wage. So I support that. I also support providing incentives to small business owners and major corporations alike who employ individuals at that $15 an hour rate. I think it's good for the economy, I think it's good for Mecklenburg County, and I think it's good for workers throughout our community.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we are looking for a yes/no response. Would you support the bill S-1176, also known as the Empower Act, which expands public campaign financing for presidential elections to also cover congressional elections? Alma Adams?
I haven't seen the bill, but yes, I think I would support it.
Tricia Cotham?
Yes.
Carla Cunningham?
Yes.
Malcolm Graham?
Yes.
Gardenia Henley?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Our next question is, Congress is considering a Family Act providing for 12 weeks of paid time off for employees to care for family members. It would be funded by matched employee and employer contributions toward an insurance policy. Do you support this legislation? Once again, a yes/no response. We begin with Tricia Cotham.
Yes.
Carla Cunningham?
Yes.
Malcolm Graham?
Yes.
Gardenia Henley?
Yes.
Alma Adams?
Yes.
Thank you. Our next question, 30-second response we're looking for. What do you think is the role of the federal government in creating good jobs in your district? Back to you, Tricia Cotham.
Well, I'm glad that we're having this dialogue about wages because it's extremely important that the federal government acts to help raise the minimum wage and do it over a reasonable time period so that small businesses and all companies, big and small, can relate to help families. I am a small business owner. I do everything that I can to pay my employees the best wages possible, and it's at a much higher rate than my competition. But I want the people who work for me to be able to afford their college. Most of them are in college at University of North Carolina at Charlotte or Central Piedmont Community College, and we must make sure that wages keep going up and up.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham.
I look at the wages as a big issue as far as like college graduates coming out of school. They're coming out of school with large amounts of debt. And so we have to move to where people can support themselves. And if we're doing that, we need to look at that banks are borrowing at 0 to 1% and students are borrowing at 8%. So when we start looking at minimum wage and if people are being paid properly, that's a big issue in our community because that's why we're having the issues, so many social ills and the lack of upward mobility in Mecklenburg County.
Malcolm Graham.
I think the federal government has a major role in terms of helping to relocate major corporations to our community for job opportunities. And I think, one, again, bringing those corporations to our community by providing incentives, penalizing those corporations who take their companies overseas to make products just to ship back, and our workers lose out on the opportunities for those jobs, et cetera. So I think we have to take a comprehensive approach to it. The federal government certainly has a role in it, and I will support common sense solutions that create new job opportunities for the citizens of Mecklenburg County and working with my federal partners.
Thank you. And again, the question is, what do you think is the role of the federal government in creating good jobs in your district? Gardenia Henley.
Thank you. The federal government should play a very, very substantial role in dealing with the needs and the wages, especially right here in Mecklenburg County, because when the maps were redrawn, they were redrawn because Mecklenburg County and the other counties within the old 12th district, it was learned that they were illegally gerrymandered, and illegally is very important. So when we talk about something that the government did that was illegal, then we need to have reparations in that regard. So, the federal government definitely needs to play a role with that, a financial role.
Thank you. Alma Adams. Actually, first we have a challenge from Tricia Cotham.
Thank you, and it's not a challenge directed at Ms. Henley, but I think it's really important to know when we are trying to recruit jobs to North Carolina, to this district in Mecklenburg County, is to make sure that we have a good infrastructure, good education, quality health care, and a workforce that is ready. This is where the federal government must work with our local governments, with our state governments, and all work together to do this, because if we do all work together, we can make great things happen in Mecklenburg County, and I plan to be a part of that.
Thank you. Ms. Adams, your response.
Thank you. The federal government does have a responsibility. I mean, we've actually taken some steps with the FAST Act in terms of the transportation needs that will help Mecklenburg County and Charlotte as well. It will bring new jobs in here. I am a proud sponsor of the Raise the Wage Act. The federal government, we're looking at that. We've just passed Every Child Succeeds, which is also going to bring dollars and support into Mecklenburg County for our children. And then I want to mention the STEM Act, which is a bill that I filed that's going to create a pipeline as well for jobs that will come into our schools for our students and into Mecklenburg and Charlotte.
All right, thank you. We have a challenge. Actually, we'll begin with Malcolm Graham.
It's not really a challenge, just a further clarification in reference to what we can do with the federal government. For an example, we have a local project, which is our 2030 plan, which is for infrastructure improvement, the blue line, the red line, the transit line going down Independence. Those projects being funded by the federal government will create jobs locally for our citizens right here. The Housing Authority, for an example, is trying to get a Choice Neighborhood grant. If we're able to get that grant from HUD to restore and revitalize public housing here in Charlotte, then those grants will lead to new jobs for our workers right here in Charlotte.
Thank you. Ms. Cunningham, did you have a challenge?
Yes.
Thank
We need the federal government to invest in restructuring our infrastructure system as well as our outdated pipelines. If we did get the federal to fund additional infrastructure, that $1 billion spent would yield 21,000 jobs, and those are good paying jobs. So the federal government can do more as far as investing in infrastructure. As we invest in infrastructure, that will help everyone. It'll create those good paying jobs, but also it would put us in a position where we don't have crumbling bridges and our pipelines are breaking and our water is possibly contaminated like it is in Flint.
Thank you, Ms. Cunningham. I think we have a challenge from Ms. Henley.
Yes, this is not necessarily a challenge, but it's a comment based on what a few of the other candidates have said. In most cases, the money is within the federal government for various programs or what have you. But one of the major problems that I have been saying for years now is that we need legislators at the state and at the local level who's going to go out and fight for the funding to go to the districts and to the areas that need it the most. We are really tired of the current legislators putting money to their cronies and not putting money to the areas that need it the most. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question is, do you support the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement? Why or why not? And we begin with Carla Cunningham.
I do not support the Trans-Pacific trade deal. For one, I don't want any jobs outsourced out of Mecklenburg County that would hurt the 12th Congressional District. So therefore, I don't support it at this time.
Malcolm Graham, your response.
I don't either. We have to make sure that any trade agreement that we engage in as a country benefits our nation first and foremost, and then at the same time make sure that we don't lose any jobs locally because of it. And so we've seen trade acts in the past which has cost North Carolina in general and specifically the 12th Congressional District thousands of jobs. And so as your congressman, I want to make sure before I support any trade agreement that I understand the details of it and the impact on our district first and foremost, and also the impact on our country as well.
All right, thank you. Gardenia Henley, your response.
Yes, I'm international, and so I see things a bit different than probably some of the other candidates or some folks here. I would have to say that with this trade agreement, if retweaked and worked properly, it could work for the United States. It could work for Charlotte specifically. But we do have to be sure that jobs are not lost and that we actually work very hard to make sure that the people of Charlotte, we're thinking about them when it comes to creating the jobs or what have you. And we can't send jobs overseas, and we can't allow the people coming from other countries, regardless of where it is, to actually inundate our economic conditions.
Thank you. Alma Adams, your response?
We lost a lot of jobs with the last trade agreement. And I've taken the position in the Congress that I will not support it. It's very clear not only to my colleagues, but it's also clear to the administration. I've talked with folks in labor, AFL-CIO, and all of the folks who really have concerns about it. We've been to the table to talk about it, and it is not something that I'll support. We have the evidence that Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and North Carolina lost a tremendous amount of jobs, and I'm not willing to take that risk again.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
I do support this, the TPP, along with President Obama. We know that companies around the world that want our products made right here in the United States. However, as it has been said, we've had bad trade deals in the past, and it's caused the workers in America significant problems in not taking our products across the world. I think that the TPP actually helps to bring our products to the world, that which will help the American worker, but we must have a level playing field, and I commend the president on his leadership for this.
Thank you. Our next question is, where do you stand on H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act? We begin with Gardenia Henley.
I'm all for anything that's going to help our senior citizens. I've been out and about quite a bit, and we have senior citizens who are actually having to make decisions on whether or not they're going to buy their prescription medication or food. And with things like diabetes or what have you, they both go hand in hand. So I really, really do support any initiatives that's going to help the seniors. It's not just only the seniors, but people with disabilities and the veterans as well. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the veterans today and say that we need to do more for them as well.
Thank you. Alma Adams.
I have always believed that health care is absolutely essential and it should be available for all and not just a privilege for some. I didn't grow up with it. I had a sick sister who we had to take to the emergency room who did not have health care. So it's important. I certainly am distressed about North Carolina not expanding Medicaid so that we could accommodate the people who don't have it. Everyone should have health care. They should have access to it. It's going to cost the taxpayers more if we don't do it. So I do support having Medicare for all, and I certainly hope that the Congress will override the states and will assume some authority in making sure that we don't allow states to opt out as North Carolina has.
Thank you. Again, the question is, where do you stand on H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act? And Tricia Cotham, your response.
Thank you. I do support Medicare for all. It's important that when we're talking about seniors that we ensure that our seniors are able to retire with dignity, but also know at the rest of their lives that they're going to have access to health care. We have a terrible problem with access to prescription drugs. The costs are out of control, and it's really wrong when seniors are having to make decisions over, do I need life-saving medication for diabetes or cancer-related, or do I pay my rent this month? Too many of our senior citizens and those that are entering into the age category do not have the funds to retire on, and health care is a right.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham, your response.
I definitely support Medicare for all. And for me, the Medicaid expansion in the state of North Carolina that has not been done is devastating to the 379,000 people that continue to live here and are the working poor that cannot receive any health care services at all. I myself have a son who is dual diagnosed, and at the time that he became ill, I had 50% coverage on my insurance, and I almost bankrupt with $21,000 worth of medical bills because he was continuous in and out of the hospital. So I see Medicare for all as a good way, not just to help individuals that are senior, but also people that are disabled in the state.
Thank you. Malcolm Graham?
I support Medicare for all. Health care is a human right. We must protect, preserve, and strengthen not only Medicare, but the Social Security system as well. We must fight any effort to privatize or weaken Medicare or Social Security. We should demand lower prices for prescription drugs, and seniors that are receiving Medicare should receive special assistance in that regard. And we should protect and defend the Affordable Care Act that the president signed into law. I think it's good for our country. I think it's good for our citizens. And again, health care is a human right, and all should have it.
All right, thank you. Our next question is 60% of the federal gas tax is used for highway and bridge construction. The federal gas tax hasn't changed since 1993, even though the inflation rate over that period was 64.6%. Should the gas tax rate be changed to provide more funding for highways and bridges? Yes or no? Well, let's begin with Alma Adams.
Yes.
Tricia Cotham?
No.
Carla Cunningham?
Yes.
Malcolm Graham?
Yes.
Gardenia Henley?
Yes.
Thank you. Our next question is, what, if any, restrictions would you place on buyers and sellers of guns? We'll begin with Tricia Cotham.
Well, as a mom of two small children, I think about their safety every single day. Too many times in America, we're turning on the television, we're seeing tragedies all over this country, and that's absolutely devastating. Gun owners understand and want common sense gun rights and gun protections. However, where the problems are is when you can go buy a gun at a trade show and no one can track it. When someone who is unsustainable and they're mentally ill and they're purchasing guns and then tragedies occur. So we must have common sense gun legislation to protect all children.
Carla Cunningham?
I support universal background checks, basically because, like I've heard one of my opponents say, is that you can go to a gun show and just purchase a gun. But that is not helping the situation far as people having guns and getting in a situation where they're using them improperly. But also we need to look at the NICS database. Is the NICS database being fed properly by the states? Of course, the federal government cannot mandate the states to report to the NICS database, but there definitely needs to be a improvement and more of a communication between states and federal with the NICS database.
Malcolm Graham?
Yes, obviously, I know how gun violence can impact a community and in a family, and I think we do need common sense gun legislation in America. We need to address the Charleston loophole, where an individual can buy a gun. The federal government, the waiting period had expired before the background check was done, and he was able to purchase a gun. I think we ought to do something about straw purchase, where individuals could buy a gun for someone else and that person has it. Gun violence in America is a serious problem. It needs a serious person to go to Washington to address it with sincerity.
Thank you. Gardenia Henley.
We do have a constitutional right to bear arms. But one thing that we are seeing a lot of is a lot of people with mental illnesses are committing crimes. So I totally 100% agree with the president's initiatives when he put stipulations and requirements on people selling guns, whether it's a single individual or groups, and make them do the background checks. So we need to do a better job of vetting people who are actually the suppliers of guns and what have you. And also, we need to put initiatives out there for families who actually have guns and tell them how to store them or what have you.
Thank you. And we do have a challenge from Carla Cunningham.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the mental illness. As far as people that are committing mass gun violence, most of those individuals are not mentally ill, and they have not had a diagnosis of mentally ill. So I don't want that out there, that most of these individuals are mentally ill, because the proof says that they're not. But when we look at the database, the NICS database, which is being fed by the states, it's not being properly fed. And that's what happened in the Dylan Roof case down in Charleston, is that when the records start to be checked, it wasn't there.
And we have a challenge from Gardenia Henley.
Yes, this is so important. I'm using my last challenge. If someone goes out and kill hundreds of people, or a few people, or just one person, that's mental illness in my book, by definition. And so I would say that there is a problem with mental illness when it comes to gun violence. We can't get around that. You know, it's not normal to just go out and kill people. It's not the Wild West. We're right here in America, and it's not the right thing to do. So we do need to deal with mental illness, and that's what's happening now on Capitol Hill.
All right, thank you. And again, the question is, what, if any, restrictions would you place on buyers and sellers of guns? And we go to Alma Adams for her response.
Thank you. I have always believed that we need to control the sale and the transferring of weapons. I've filed a number of bills in the North Carolina House, and we're continuing to work on that issue in Congress. But we do have to strengthen the background checks. We've got to make sure that what happens at gun shows can be traced and regulated. And I think we also have to restrict the time limits on which you purchase a gun or weapon, and then you get the registration, and that's the end of it. So I think we need to shorten the time period. And then we need to look at the fact that the General Assembly in North Carolina allows you now to carry guns at schools and at restaurants and in bars. I mean, I think that we've got to be a little more conscientious about the laws that we pass.
All right, thank you for your response. Our next question is, are we adequately protected against another financial downturn like the 2008 recession? Looking for a 30-second response, and we begin with Malcolm Graham.
I think we have to continue to monitor Wall Street. I think we have to continue to monitor the big banks in America to ensure that they have fair practices in terms of borrowing and lending, to ensure that we won't have the same situation that we had several years ago. Obviously, we want to invest in our corporations. We want to invest in our banks. We want those to be institutions to be successful, but not at the expense of the American people, and certainly not at the expense of the middle class. We need common sense legislation to protect the middle class against big corporations and big business.
Thank you. Alma Adams, let's go to you.
Well, I think the Congress has really taken a good look at this. I don't think everyone who suffered in this crisis has recovered. And so we need to continue to monitor that process, help those people who are still struggling. But we need to keep a better eye on how we're treating our consumers, and we also need to make certain provisions for our businesses, but not at the risk of jeopardizing our citizens. We're working through Dodd-Frank and a number of other pieces of legislation to try to monitor this process along the way.
Thank you. We go back to Gardenia Henley for her response.
Yes, thank you. The last financial meltdown that we had, most people didn't see it coming. So I'm saying that what we really need is oversight and accountability of these financial institutions, of the education systems and other institutions such as that. We do need oversight. A lot of people are saying, well, we have too much oversight. We don't. And that's why we had that meltdown, in my opinion, one of the reasons why. And so oversight is very important, and we need someone on Capitol Hill who knows how to fight fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. We have too many inexperienced people out there who are not doing the public any service by not knowing what they're doing.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
Thank you. Well, I think Wall Street is doing just fine, and that was a big part of the problem, is that they are buying and selling and paying for members of Congress, and that's extremely wrong, and that's at the expense of hard-working families. Wall Street is getting richer and richer. Working families, single moms are getting poorer and poorer. That's not the American way. That's not what we should want in our country, and we need to close corporate tax loopholes and also look at our income tax and allowing the wealthiest to get away with the most, and a CEO paying the same tax level as his secretary is ridiculous.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham.
I think that right now that a lot of people haven't recovered from the downfall during the economy. The banks have and Wall Street have, but everyone else is still struggling. So we do need stronger oversight, but we also need people that go to Congress that will put them first instead of taking money from lots of banks or lots of corporations. This seat should not be up for sale. Washington should not be deciding who our next congressperson is going to be. We need to be putting people first.
Thank you. And now it's time for us to go to our closing statements. And once again, a reminder, you'll have 30 seconds to make your statement, and we will begin with Alma Adams.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to be here at WTVI. I am Congresswoman Alma Adams. I've had the privilege of serving the citizens of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County now, fighting for them, fighting for Charlotte, fighting for Mecklenburg, making sure that we deliver for the needs that are here. Making sure that we support our schools, making sure that we close the gaps, not only in education, but in the workforce. I'm going to continue to work to increase the federal living wage so that we have a living wage, and I'm going to continue to fight. And I'm asking the citizens of Charlotte and Mecklenburg on June 7th to vote for Alma Adams, your Congresswoman, who has stood up and fought for you and who will continue to do that and to deliver for Mecklenburg and Charlotte.
Thank you. Tricia Cotham?
Thank you, and thank you for all who are watching this. It's important to note that our current Congresswoman lives in Greensboro and has served Greensboro for many, many years and at many different elected offices. I am from Mecklenburg County. I went to school here in Mecklenburg County. I was a teacher here in Mecklenburg County and was Teacher of the Year in 2000. 2002. I became an assistant principal at Independence High School in East Meck, and I've been serving Mecklenburg County for the last 10 years in our state legislature. I understand and know Mecklenburg County, and I'm raising my children here. So on June 7th, I ask for your vote. Tricia Cotham, thank you.
Thank you. Carla Cunningham?
I have lived in Mecklenburg County over 40 years, and it is my home. I have been serving in my community way before I went to the General Assembly. I'm a community activist and a community leader. I have been nursing for over 30-something years, giving back to this community. Currently, my district sits totally inside the epicenter of the 12th Congressional District where I reside. I am asking you today to vote for me on June the 7th, and I will take your fight to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Malcolm Graham?
Thank you, WTVI and the League of Women Voters. I ask you to consider this. Do you want to vote for someone who's been representing this community for 18 months, or vote for Malcolm Graham, who's been representing this community for the past 30 years? I served as a nonprofit executive director. I served as a corporate leader, a college administrator, a member of the Charlotte City Council, and a 10-year member of the State Senate, where I was chairman of the Mecklenburg County delegation. 2 years ago, I won Mecklenburg County with 44% of the vote for U.S. Congress, and I'm asking the citizens of Mecklenburg County to go to the polls on June 7th and vote for Malcolm Graham for the United States Congress representing the 12th Congressional District. Thank you.
Gardenia Henley?
Yes, thank you. I started my career in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I joined the Air Force, and I went from there, and I became a diplomat with the Department of State. I'm the only candidate with national and international experience. I'm the only candidate with financial experience. I'm the only candidate that has 22 years of legislative experience, having been appointed by President Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright into the diplomatic corps. I can hit the ground running. I'm the only candidate who has a proven record of fighting for you and saving billions of your tax dollars. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and everyone else who actually put this together, and all the taxpayers for your attention. Thank you very much. And please vote for Gardenia Henley come June 7th.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our Democratic candidates in the U.S. Congressional House District 12 race for taking part in our debate. For more information about the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, go to www.goleaguego.org. And here's a reminder for Mecklenburg County voters. Early voting begins Thursday, May 26th and 27th at Central Piedmont Community College's Facility Services Building. Voting sites will be closed on May 28th, 29th, and 30th due to the Memorial Day holiday weekend. All voting sites will be open from May 31st through Saturday, June 4th, and the election is Tuesday, June 7th. Up next is the debate for the Republican candidates for U.S. Congressional House District 12. Thanks for watching.